Welcome to Leading by Doing, a practice-based approach to improvement. I'm Kathleen Ryan Jackson with the SISEP Center, and with me today is Amanda Waldrop, Assistant Director in the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool at the Kentucky Department of Education. Our objectives for today are first and foremost to celebrate Madison County schools, their improvement efforts, and to explain the how of Kentucky's improvement story. We'll show evidence of improvement, share Madison's secret sauce, and end with describing how Kentucky is scaling a proven process. Today, we honor the exemplary work in Madison County schools. We honor their teachers who are on the ground every day to meet the unique needs of their students. We honor their school staff, principals, district administrators, and their board, who are all absolutely steadfast in their commitment to do the complex and real work of implementation. Everyone was focused on supporting teachers and improving the mathematics outcomes of all students, especially students with disabilities. So please join me in giving Madison County Schools a virtual round of applause. We thank all of the authors, and with a special shout out to Gina Lake and Sarah Schaefer for sharing their stories, and to Steve Case, who made analysis possible with the release of student-level data from 2015 until 2019. When I prepared for today, I went and I looked at Madison County Schools' website to review their vision, because I wanted to share with you how their vision comes to life and how they are truly on fire for their students' future. So here's what I would see when I was in the district. In a district meeting with school staff, I saw the superintendent, Dr. Gillum, give undivided full attention to all staff. Laptop was closed, phone off, full attention. In a school meeting with participating teachers, I saw Dr. Gillum stop in and simply say, "I'm just here to make sure you have what you need." And Gina Lake or a representative from the district office would attend every single school level meeting to make sure the teachers and administrators had the training and coaching they requested during their meeting. And that was all based on the review of the teachers' mathematicals instructional walkthrough data. So their mathematics coaches always sat side by side with teachers as the teachers took charge to lead the way to improvement. Teachers agreed to have coaches collect fidelity data, and teachers used the data in aggregate to identify their instructional goals for improvement. And then also the follow-up training and coaching that they required. Everyone, everywhere, what we saw was visible champions advocating for and supporting one another. It's also really important to understand that Madison was one of 4 districts that were part of the Kentucky Department of Education's first iteration of their implementation zone. An implementation zone is a representative slice of the state. And in Kentucky, that included a large urban, suburban, and very small rural districts and schools. They, like the other 3 districts, had access to all of the systems, tools, and activities that were developed by educators with the support of the Kentucky Department of Education. So now I want to turn it over to Amanda, because she will share with you how Kentucky developed an effective implementation infrastructure to support the improvement of mathematics.
Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks everybody for your patience. So in Kentucky, we worked in partnership with SISEP, and we're very fortunate to work with SISEP to learn how to put the components of the formula for success in place. And so one of the first components of the formula for success is an effective practice, which essentially is the what that you plan to implement. And so the what, or effective practice, should be teachable, learnable, doable, and measurable, meaning that it should be something that can easily be trained, supported, and can be measured to determine if it's being implemented as intended. Along with that, you can see that next component of the formula for success, we focused on effective implementation. And so this includes installing a system of training and coaching to ensure that those that are using the effective practice have been prepared with training and continue to receive follow-up support through coaching. And it also includes having a data system to measure the use of the effective practice. And then if you take a look at the slide again, you can see that third component of the formula for success, which is an enabling context. And this is where you have to have a hospitable environment to grow the use of the practice. And so this includes having teams engage in data analysis through continuous improvement cycles to make informed decisions on implementation and to remove barriers for those that are implementing the effective practice. And so I always enjoy presenting this slide because I'm a former math teacher. And so seeing this on here with a multiplication problem, you think about if I substitute 0 in for any of those components and you multiply anything by 0, essentially you're going to get 0. And so what's really great about the way the formula for success is shown is that ultimately every component is important and they're all necessary to achieve socially significant outcomes. Next slide, please. So in Kentucky, as we began to put the components of the formula for success in place, one of the first things that we did was gathered a representative group of stakeholders from across the state to help establish our area of focus. And so, what's interesting is we started with that enabling context of the formula for success. And so, thinking about this being a multiplication problem, essentially you can start anywhere within that formula for success. But we started in Kentucky with that enabling context. And so we really needed to identify our area of focus. And so we gathered a representative group of stakeholders to help us do that. And so we started broad, knowing that improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities was the ultimate goal. But we needed to narrow that a little bit more, based on our area of need so that we could be more focused. And so because of that, having a team comprised of representation from each level of the education system, including the state, region, district, and school, was critical to ensure that we could gather input from a variety of stakeholders and gather and hear all of their voices. And so this team engaged in plan, do, study, act cycles to determine where to focus. And ultimately, they determined that increasing proficiency for students with disabilities in 8th grade mathematics would be our area of focus, and that we would do this by providing support to both elementary and middle school teachers on the use of evidence-based practices. And so you may be wondering, if our target is 8th grade, why are we focusing in both elementary and middle school? And so the reason for that is that we know that math is cumulative and it builds upon itself. And so we wanted to ultimately ensure that students were receiving high quality instruction as early as possible. Next slide, please. And so one of the keys to an enabling context that I shared with you on the previous slide is really to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to provide their perspective and that the lead agency understands their points of view and unique needs, including parent and community organizations. And so having a variety of perspectives really allowed us to have that qualitative data in addition to quantitative data to really work towards our goal or our area of focus. And so this allows everyone to see how they play a role in the process. Next slide, please. And so once we identified our area of focus, you can see we're moving to the effective practice component of the formula for success. Our team had determined through our data analysis using improvement cycles that we did not have a quality standard for math instruction to support students with disabilities. So what that really means is that math instruction, high quality math instruction was really not clearly defined and operationalized. And so as a result, we established another team, and you're going to hear me use the word teams a lot during this. We couldn't do this without teams, but we comprised another team of math experts from across the state and each level of the system represented. And so some of the representation from this team included, general and special education representatives within our agency at the state level. We also had representation from our special education regional technical assistance centers. We had a district leadership representative. We had a teacher on the team. We also have a couple of math organizations within our state that also were on the team. And then we also wanted to include institutes of higher education as well. And so by having such a variety of team members, this helped us to arrive at a common philosophy and core components of mathematics instruction, because everyone could see they had a role to play. And this ultimately really helped us to establish buy-in and collective commitment of the use of the effective practice. And so the team developed what we call a practice profile, which describes what quality math instruction looks like in the classroom along the continuum. And so to help us measure the use of these practices within the practice profile, this team was repurposed to develop a fidelity measure as well, because we obviously wanted to measure what the use of those effective practices look like in the classroom to help us make informed decisions on how we could further support teachers with those effective practices. And so through the process of establishing a team with a variety of expertise from across the state in math, the team learned through productive struggle. And although many had their own philosophies of what quality math instruction looked like, we always had to go back to the research to come to consensus. And although this was not an easy task at times, it's what really helped the team ensure that they had selected a highly effective practice before investing time and energy into implementing it. Next slide, please. And so you can see here the formula for success. We're moving right along. We've covered enabling context and effective practice, but we also had to focus on effective implementation. And so as the team developed a quality standard for math, that was essentially our next step. And so this included the development of a training plan for how we're going to train the components of the math practice profile or the effective practice. And so to do this, we replicated our processes with the effective practice. And you're going to hear me say replicate, repurpose, team members by taking some of those same team members that participated on that math team to create a training plan. We also developed a training fidelity checklist as well as a training evaluation feedback form to collect data on training effectiveness, because we wanted to ensure that the trainings that we were conducting on the effective practice were helping to meet the needs of adult learners. And then additionally, we didn't want to just have training. We also had to have that follow-up support in the form of coaching. And so the team, through the development of the practice profile, the math team determined that a quality standard for coaching was needed as well. And so coaching was not clearly defined and operationalized. And this was something in particular that our districts had also lifted up to us through our linked teaming structure. And so as a result, we repurposed another team. I told you you're going to hear me say team a lot in this, because I said we cannot do this without all of our partners across the state. But we repurposed some of the same team members from that math team, and we had an additional team that focused on coaching. And so they had coaching expertise to develop a coaching practice profile to establish a consistent and high quality process for coaching. And the team also established measures for coaching as well, because we wanted to ensure that we're measuring the effectiveness of coaching. So we also developed a coaching log and a teacher survey as well, because we wanted to hear feedback from teachers as far as how the coaching was going, because we really wanted to make sure that they had a voice in the process. And so the key to this process was not only to establish these quality standards and plans for training and coaching, but a way to measure their effectiveness. And so the collection tools I mentioned are used to review and analyze training data, coaching data, in addition to fidelity data at each level of the system. So we've got all levels, state, region, district, and school, all looking at the data to determine any barriers to implementation and to help remove those barriers so that teachers have what they need to effectively implement the practice. And one thing to note is that as each level of the system is looking at the data, teachers are included in that school level looking at the data. And so it's critical that the implementers review and analyze implementation data as well, because they're the ones engaging in the use of the practice, and they can help to best voice successes and barriers to implementing the effective practice. And so in order to analyze, data efficiently and effectively, we received feedback from districts that a data dashboard was needed to make data-based decisions to support the effective implementation of the practice. You heard me mention that we develop data measures for all sorts of different things around training, coaching, and fidelity. And so this takes a lot of time to create, some sort of dashboard or like a one-stop shop to look at implementation data. And so districts had requested support from the state to assist in the development of that one-stop shop for looking at data through a data dashboard. And so we replicated and scaled the processes that we had already learned through all those teams that I talked about, through that development of the effective practice and establishing systems for training and coaching. And we had a team that came together to create this dashboard. And so the dashboard includes all of the data that I've talked about. And by having that data dashboard, it helped us to better usability test the tools that we had developed so that we could eventually release them on a wider scale. So we've now since been able to release the math practice profile, as well as the fidelity instrument that we had developed to measure the use of that math practice profile. So we've now released it statewide, and it's actually available on our website so that any districts across the state can use those resources to help support them with mathematics instruction to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. And so as you heard me describe the formula for success, we've gone through each of the components. I gave you some examples of the different ways that we had, put those components in place. Through our learning with SISEP, we established our first transformation zone, or TZ for short, to build the capacity of districts to put the components of the formula for success in place, including Madison County Public Schools. And so a transformation zone, as Kathleen described earlier, is essentially, just a reminder, it's a vertical slice of the education system. You can see like that little piece of cake there. That's always kind of the way that I remember it. But it's that vertical slice of the education system that's small enough to be manageable, yet large enough to represent the system as a whole. And so in other words, it's a learning laboratory that we can use to help learn about effective implementation. And so we began our transformation zone with 4 districts that included, and you can see on the slide there, the different types of districts that we had as part of that transformation zone. We had a large urban district, we had a medium suburban and small rural, and we wanted to ensure that we had as many districts as possible and that they were represented within that first TZ so that everybody could see themselves be part of that, and that we could ensure that we tried to, work out as many bugs or kinks as we possibly could through that first iteration and try to solve any barriers, implementation barriers that we had with that, and so that it would be proven in each of those different environments. Next slide, please. And so by putting the components of the formula for success in place, we were able to establish readiness and build systems to support the use of the effective practice, as well as measure and make informed decisions and adjustments along the way. And so this ultimately led to higher fidelity of implementation of the effective practice, which also helped to lead to achieving improved student outcomes. Next slide, please. And so we achieved these results because we were always willing to say, what is the next best question we can ask and try to solve it? And now I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen again.
That curiosity for improvement was widespread, and it resulted in 6,728 students in the 7 transformation zone schools outperforming a matched sample of non-TZ schools. So here we see a graph with 3rd and 5th grade students with disabilities in the proficient and distinguished category on Kentucky's state mathematics assessment. And we see in TZ schools, they increased from 21 to 30% compared to non-TZ schools who increased from 18 to 20%. And that's from 2015 to 2019. A link to the brief is provided. And in the brief, you can see the complete analysis, including evidence for improvement for students who are Black with an IEP. And for their efforts in 2018, Kentucky was recognized by the Carnegie Foundation and awarded a spotlight for quality and continuous improvement. They saw you can't separate implementation from improvement. They are the perfect marriage. A link to the award and the brief that describes the complete analysis are provided here. So when Madison saw the data that we just viewed, they were curious about how they were represented in that data. So they committed to sharing their student level data so we could track and measure the change in student performance for just the students who were part of the transformation zone since 2016. So when comparing two Madison elementary schools, one TZ and one non-TZ, from 2016 to 2019, again using state assessment scores for mathematics, the percentage of 3rd to 5th grade students with an IEP in the proficient and distinguished category increased from 27% to 39% in the TZ school. Unfortunately, it decreased from 33 to 15% in the non-TZ school. Now, while Madison middle school results were not significant, they did make improvements. And you can see further analysis in the Madison brief coming out in February. So let's reflect and engage for a minute. Given the results, how could you apply one of the implementation components we have discussed in your context? So we all know improving outcomes for students with disabilities is not an easy task, especially on the State Summit of Assessment. So this is quite an accomplishment. And we want to share with you a little more about how they did it. So in 2016, Madison formed a district implementation team, and they were focused on developing skill and capacity to apply the active implementation frameworks and the formula for success. And they were committed to using Kentucky's quality standard for mathematics. They were also committed to a new way of work, and they knew it was going to take time, and they had to go slow to go fast. After a careful exploration process that outlined district and school agreements, 2 schools agreed to participate, Madison Middle and Kirksville Elementary. At Kirksville, half of the teachers began in the first year, and the second half joined in the second year. Then building implementation teams were formed, and all participating teachers were active members. They designed a system for observing and collecting instructional classroom data, and they set agreements for how the observations would be conducted. Teachers knew how the data would be used, only in aggregate and not for evaluation. Rather, it was going to be used to inform leadership about what was missing in the system that teachers knew they would need to improve their mathematics instruction. And that was specifically quality training, coaching, and data use. Everyone agreed on what effective instruction, training, and coaching looked like, and how it could be measured in practice so that it could be improved. Without this first key ingredient, nothing else would fall into place. Teachers also agreed regarding what quality instruction looked like in the classroom, again, using that quality standard for mathematics. However, they were very clear that they needed the support with the how, or the how of quality mathematics instruction, because they were all credentialed in multiple subjects. They were not content experts in mathematics. I will tell you, I remember with conviction, they explained they needed the support to develop their instructional math skills. They requested support from a mathematics coach, and, really just to provide that ongoing and consistent guidance with their daily instruction. While district administration was reluctant due to past failed efforts to use instructional coaches effectively, they were willing to test the science behind coaching because, remember, after all, they committed to being champions for teachers' requests. The second key ingredient was effective implementation, where teachers led mathematics improvement and implementation teams and district leadership led systems improvement. So Madison teachers led improvement efforts around instruction as they worked side by side with coaches and administrators. They used their instructional walkthrough data in aggregate every single month to identify and assess growth on their school-wide instructional goals for improvement. Sometimes I would see them working side by side using best practice instructional videos, where they really studied effective instructional practice. And, what we saw was we all saw everyone was strengthening their mindset for improvement. So as you can see from this graph displaying teachers' instructional data, this is over the course of 4 months, teachers continuously strengthen their instructional practice. It was the commitment of the teachers, those closest to the students, who led and co-created solutions for their instructional improvement in their monthly team meetings. They were really making lasting change in their classrooms. And implementation teams led systems improvement. As I mentioned before, all walkthrough data was viewed in aggregate and not used for teacher evaluation. District leadership used the walkthrough data to determine what was missing in the system they were responsible for delivering to teachers. District administrators, math coaches, and principals were all trained to use the Otis walkthrough fidelity measure. And annually, they committed to completing Otis reliability training to ensure all observations and scores were reliable and consistent from teacher to teacher and school to school. Everyone was focused on what teachers were requesting and required for their continuous improvement of their instruction. The third key ingredient was the development of an enabling context where teams at every level of the system were using data to remove barriers and then ensure resources were allocated to replicate the effective practice they were seeing, including instructional practice, training practice, and coaching practice. And then, of course, how they were using data. Everyone knew that one level without the other was going to be insufficient for large-scale change. Everyone was testing and strengthening their systems so they would be ready to replicate a proven process. For 2 years, Madison teachers, school coaches, a school administrator, and a district administrator worked side by side at their monthly building implementation team meetings. Madison also received the support of a regional coach who was skilled in both systems and instructional coaching. Their regional coaches were the critical link between the Kentucky Department of Education and the district. The goal of the regional coach was to develop the capacity of the district and school teams to use implementation data, capacity training, and coaching to support teachers' effective use of mathematics practice in the classroom so they could reduce the variability of support available to teachers from classroom to classroom and from school to school. Now I'm going to hand it back to Amanda so she can share how they are applying all of their trial and learning across the years to their current scaling efforts. So if we go to the next slide, Amanda, do you want to engage us in this reflection?
Sure. So you've heard Kathleen and I talk an awful lot, about the work that we've done so far to put the components of the formula for success in place. And so we want to give you all an opportunity just to share. So we'd like you to just reflect and think about, how do you know when a practice is ready to replicate and scale? You heard me mention how, we replicated this process with teams, we repurposed teams. You probably were tired of hearing me say the word teams because we said it so many times because we had so many teams that we used to help do the work. But what would you, what are some of those things, how do you know when something's ready to replicate and scale? And what would you examine and measure as a result of that? So take just a minute to reflect and, feel free to drop some ideas or thoughts in the chat. And while folks are, getting ready to drop some things in the chat, I saw there was a question about the fidelity measure and whether it was available online. So the one that and I think, Rebecca, I appreciate you and Sarah answering that question. So the fidelity instrument that we developed, which was the Kentucky Mathematics Innovation Tool, is available on our webpage, and we'll have I'll share a little bit more about that here in just a few slides. You can see what that looks like, and there will be a link available to what we call the Math Toolkit in the presentation so that you can access that. And I think it was also put in the chat as well. So that will be shared with everybody. So you're welcome to look at that. And then there was a question about the validity. I can't speak to the Otis, so I don't know if Rebecca or Kathleen wants to speak to that. So just giving kind of a reference with that, Madison County, they worked with the observation tool for instructional supports and systems. So initially, we did not have a fidelity measure available in Kentucky. So we started with the observation tool for instructional supports and systems, or the Otis, which really can be used for any content area. And so we started with that initially, and through that learning about, fidelity measures and, how to put that system in place, we were then able to take that learning and apply it to a math-specific fidelity instrument that we have worked to develop. And so with that process, we took it through several, I think we did 4 cycles of usability testing with that. So we tested the one that we had developed in Kentucky, the Kentucky Mathematics Innovation Tool. We had taken it through several iterations of usability testing with, we had about 4 to 5 users that used it. We tried it in a variety of grade levels. You heard me mention that in Kentucky, we're specifically focused in elementary and middle school. So we tried it out in all the different grade levels. We had a survey at the end where folks that were using the tool were able to provide input and feedback in terms of what language was clear or not clear with the tool. And so that really helped us to make adjustments. And it was really it was a great learning process for us to go through that really rigorous rounds, those really rigorous rounds of usability testing. And I think a lot of that is attributed to us using the Otis initially. I think really helped us to learn through that process. So we were able to, again, like you've heard me say, it's like rinse and repeat. You replicate it over and over again. Once you learn it, you're able to then apply it to other areas because you've learned so much through that process. So hopefully that answers a little bit about the K-MIT and the idea, the things that we discussed with the K-MIT. Now, like I said, I can't speak to the Otis, so I don't know if Rebecca or Kathleen wants to speak in terms of validating the Otis or not, because I saw that was a question as well.
Absolutely. Briefly, so we developed Otis based on Hattie's highest effect sizes of effective teacher practice. And it is a tool that we actually use within our SISEP states, and we have not yet released it to the broader public. So we can get you information on the Otis. You saw the components of the Otis on the web, on the particular slide. It tests it really is used to measure the effectiveness of the system and those highly effective teacher practices identified through Hattie's research.
Amanda, there was also a question in the chat. We have a few seconds here.
Sure.
The area of focus could be effective implementation. We often don't lack of information. It's training and capacity to train. I'm wondering the resources and capacity you were able to have during this process.
The resources and capacity.
So your training measure, the resources that you have for your coaching practice profile.
How did you find time and money? And
okay, gotcha. So honestly, and it's so funny because people will say in Kentucky, like, what is your secret sauce? We are very fortunate that we have a lot of just great partners. We have, great leadership that helps to support that. And we really didn't get into the implementation drivers too much today, like specific by showing a picture of it. But I highly encourage everybody to look at the active implementation hub, at the implementation drivers, but leadership is a critical piece of that. And it's at the bottom of the triangle. And so that really is kind of the foundation to help support the work, because we had great leaders that really helped us to make space for the work. And they helped to advocate for the work so that we were able to gather, representatives, from, different contexts. And, we had folks that were willing to help, sit in on teams and help us to think through what it was that we needed to accomplish to help ensure that we are improving outcomes for students with disabilities. So really it's so funny because people say, well, that's like your secret sauce. So it's hard for me we just have a lot of willingness within our state to help support the work. And like I said, a lot of it, I think, boiled down to leadership was one of the key things, because they helped to really create that enabling context for us and help us to advocate for the work so that folks were willing to come and join and help support. So I don't know if that helps answer the question. Sorry, I'm very visual, so I didn't see it in the chat.
Yep. How about we keep moving? And I'm still collecting questions as they come in, because there's some more questions, but we'll see if we have time at the end. So let's get through this next section.
Yep, sounds
perfect.
Great.
And if we don't have time to address all of the questions, we'll make sure that we respond to all of them after the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. So we already kind of touched on this a little bit about scaling a proven process. And so by learning, through putting the formula for success in place with the transformation zone and working with teams to establish the systems of support, we've been able to replicate and scale in a variety of ways. And you've heard me touch on that, throughout the section where I talked about the formula for success. You heard me say we had teams, we learned from those teams, we replicated that process. So, one of the biggest things that we were able to replicate and scale was through that we initially developed that math practice profile, and we used that exact same process in terms of having a team of experts that came together to dig into the research to help us then replicate that for coaching. We also, and I didn't really mention it today, but we also developed a data practice profile. And then we developed, the training and coaching measures as well. So really that's one way that we've been able to really scale and to replicate is just through the learning that we've had through the teams that we've worked with and having all that expertise at the table to help support with the work. Next slide, please. And so thinking about that, fast forward 10 years later, we've learned through that. We have a state implementation team, or we call it the SIT, that is actually taking what we've learned through that formula for success, and we're going to establish a tiered model of support. And so what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to better differentiate supports for districts based on their needs and help meet them where they are. So districts will now have more options on the level of support that they would like to engage in, whether that be the intensive system of support that I had talked about earlier, that we initially established, or they can actually opt to participate in targeted support or universal support. And so that's really what we've been trying to fine tune and hone in. You know, we felt like once we got down that intensive level of support, now we're ready to think about, okay, well, what if intensive is not quite where a district is at right now? What would that maybe look like from a targeted level of support lens, and as well as universal supports too? So that's really where we're moving towards now that we've been able to, we're now able to scale a proven process essentially. Next slide, please. And so with that SIT, you know, a couple of key things that really helps to create an enabling context for this work is that the SIT is representative. You know, we have to ensure that we have expertise from a variety of areas. And so our SIT has expertise in coaching, math, effective implementation, behavior, and so on. So we wanted to ensure that we had a lot of different perspectives on the team. The team is also linked with communication protocols so that we can continue that linked communication up and down the system. We can hear from schools and districts and regions in terms of the supports that are needed, as well as, you know, maybe any implementation barriers that they're having. And so that's really helping us to learn, to help, you know, the team make informed decisions in terms of, you know, that in terms of where to go next. And additionally, everything that the SIT works on is co-created so that everyone can see themselves in the work. So we all do it together as a state implementation team. Next slide, please. And so really, you know, that's essentially our next step. Like, where do we go next? So really, we're going to continue to engage in continuous improvement cycles. We're always wanting to get better at the work that we're doing. We always want to try to ensure that teachers are supported and that they have what they need to ultimately impact results for students with disabilities. And so we are going to continue to refine our intensive support structure to be sure that districts have what they need, and that we will continue to develop our targeted and universal supports. We need to try to fill those out a little bit more now that we've learned through that intensive support model. Next slide, please. And so with that, this kind of goes back to some of the resources that you all had asked. There were some questions in the chat about, you know, the math observation tool that we had talked about. And so that goes to this one. If you click there for me, please, Rebecca, there you go. We've got the Kentucky Mathematics Toolkit to support students with disabilities. So this particular toolkit is available on our website. And so it's actually hyperlinked in the presentation, so you'll be able to go to it. And I think it's also been put into the chat. But this toolkit includes our math practice profile that we had talked about. So we developed the practice profile first. Once we learned through using a fidelity measure with the Otis, we then were able to develop the Kentucky Mathematics Innovation Tool. And so that is also in this toolkit. And there's also kind of a high-level explanation on how to conduct walkthroughs using that, using the Kentucky Mathematics Innovation Tool. So all of that is in here. And then there's a little bit of a description on as far as our process and our work as well in that. And then if you click again, there's several white papers. So we're very fortunate to work with SISEP, and we've actually have several white papers that are available that describe the processes that we've gone through at Kentucky. So there is a how-to guide as far as how we established a usable innovation, which is, we've got lots of different resources in there. Some of the things that I talked about today with the training and coaching is also, there's some descriptions as, you know, as far as the process that we went through. And then if you click again, we have another white paper that's on, you can see it's accomplishing effective and durable change. So this was kind of the, this is actually more towards the beginning of our work and how we were able to start to see improvements in student outcomes through looking at benchmark data. And then next we have the improved math outcomes as well. So we've got several different resources. You're welcome to take a look at these. Like I said, they're all hyperlinked in the presentation. And so that just describes a little bit more about the different work that we've done in Kentucky and in partnership with SISEP.
And one thing here, if we just back up for 1 second, some people have asked about the timeline, and that resource, that how-to guide, outlines the timeline for how all of this work unfolded. So that will be a helpful place for you to link to and dig deeper in.
Thanks, Kathleen. All right, so that brings us to our last reflect and engage. So thinking about just summarizing and reflecting on the things that we've talked about today, what is one thing that you've learned today, and what are the next steps that you will take on your implementation journey? So just take just a moment just to reflect on that, and feel free to share any thoughts or ideas on that in the chat.
And I think the majority of the questions have been answered as we've gone along throughout the chat. We just get a question about any post-COVID data.
So the experimental studies, COVID, we don't have any post-COVID data yet, but I know, Amanda, that your state systemic improvement plan will have some post-COVID data that Kentucky makes available on their website.
Yes, we have the state. So the work that I described, a lot of that is through our Kentucky State Systemic Improvement Plan, and so that we put that in on our public reporting page within our web page for the Kentucky Department of Education, and so it has some data in there. So yeah, that is available on that as well in terms of our math outcomes for students with disabilities.
Any comments on sustaining fidelity across grade level teams over time, big ideas or nuances you are learning?
So as far as sustaining fidelity across grade level teams, the things that's been a little bit tricky, I'll be honest, is turnover has been a bit tricky to navigate with that. But I think a lot of that boils down to having a team that's on board and that is willing and ready to, use the math practices. And so that has been a little bit tricky at times, navigating turnover. But again, a lot of it boils down to teams. A lot of it boils down to having, onboarding processes for staff when they come on board, having it documented in training plans and coaching plans in terms of, how to address that if you have, teachers that come in, in the middle of the school year or things like that. So just having those processes documented, also thinking through, selection criteria as well in terms of, what are the necessary skills that are needed to implement the effective practice as intended. So having those selection criteria components as well as is important in terms of selecting, teachers coming on board that you're, as far as if you're hiring for a new teacher. So those are just a few things I would say that help support the fidelity of that, is just having those processes in place to help endure and sustain through turnover.
Thank you. From your experience, what is the most challenging part of implementing high quality math evidence-based practices?
I think turnover.
That's what, right? Turnover and leadership.
Yes, turnover, has been the biggest challenge, I would say, for sure. And a lot of it, again, goes back to the documentation of all of those processes and having, clear onboarding. And then I think also, being upfront with teachers, like we, SISEP, we work with them to have, we learned about give gets as far as, saying, here's what, we're going to provide for you. And here's what, this is what you get in return as essentially of that. And this is what we need from you. And so just being very transparent and having folks at the table and teachers at the table, I think can make a big difference. But yeah, turnover by far has been the most challenging, I would say, and continues to be challenging throughout this process.
All right, here's another. Oh, go ahead, Kathleen.
Leslie brings up a really good question. Any thoughts on districts without instructional coaches? So many of because of all the systems and processes that were put in place and used, number one, to the previous question, it really reduced the challenge of implementing high quality, effective practices, because when people came on board, they had the processes, they had what they needed to onboard. And then for smaller districts, even in the larger districts, they went to taking this process and developing peer-to-peer coaching models with the teachers, right? They're our biggest asset that we don't take advantage of. And so really thinking about, out of the box, from the very beginning, if you can't afford instructional coaches, don't let that get in your way. Support teachers in being instructional coaches for one another.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one more, if that's okay. You mentioned that teachers informed leaders of what they needed. What was missing in order to do their jobs? What if teachers mention something that's not research-based, like comments such as students are lazy and having lower expectations? If that happened, how was it handled?
I think it comes back to the coaches, the highly effective coaches. And to number one, listen to people's concerns, but then to go back and ground those concerns in the research. So what's behind perhaps students not engaging, right? Not that they're not engaging, what's behind it? What's missing? We're always looking at what's missing to ensure that people have the resources they need. And that's, I think do a whole webinar on that. So but I would love if you reach out to me or Amanda, we would love to discuss that a little more, because I think it's really important again, to listen, but then to redirect and think about what's behind those behaviors and how do we look at the system to see what's missing. And we also want to go on and share resources because there are some really important resources here. So on the next slide, you'll see, the SISEP brief is coming out soon. You'll all get a link to it when it's released. Really, really incredibly helpful are these Kentucky Lightning Talks. So the Kentucky Valley Educational Co-op, or their Special Ed Regional Technical Assistance Center, has a lovely lightning talk on scaling district exploration. Shows you exactly how they do it, how they dive into the data, and how they engage those districts. Also, a lightning talk on the state implementation team from Kentucky, how they developed it. Don't miss out on low performing to rising stars from Jefferson County Public Schools, our large rural district that was participating in this work. It highlights a low-performing school that rose to a rising star. And then finally, also from Jefferson County Public Schools, an article on how you develop district ready. On the next slide, we want to close with a link to NERN services and supports. If you're seeking guidance or really are thinking about how do we evaluate our education or our organization's effectiveness, go ahead and click on this link and you'll see the services and supports that we offer. You see links to our other resources, and also at the bottom, please take the time to complete the session evaluation. We're going to pop it into the chat in just a moment. Your evaluation of this session is so important. We use all data to continuously improve. So, Amanda, we really want to thank our participants, right? Thank you for engaging with us. If we didn't get to your questions, we will respond. Any closing from Amanda?
I just want to thank everybody for joining, and we hope that you all were to be able to take away some learning that you can apply within your work. And so thank you again for joining today. We appreciate it.